In a world that rewards loudness, the quiet ones hold the real power. We are told to share, to network, to promote ourselves as if exposure itself is proof of success. But those who understand power, true power, never tell people what they do. They move like shadows through light unseen but always present. They understand what the philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls the violence of transparency. In his view, the modern world is obsessed with making everything visible, measurable, and shareable. Every thought becomes a post. Every success becomes a brand. Every failure a meme. But those who live this way have already surrendered. They have traded mystery for validation, silence for applause. Curtis Yarvin, in his own way, understood this too. His philosophy of the unseen state, of decentralized power, reveals something deeper, that influence does not exist in noise, but in the quiet architecture beneath it. The real builders do not shout. They whisper. So today's lesson is simple. Never tell people what you do, because once you do, they'll no longer see you as a person but as a mirror for their own envy, fear, and judgment. Byung-Chul Han once said, "The more we expose, the less we exist." He meant that the act of revealing everything, of showing all, kills the very essence that gives depth to a person. In mystery lies strength. In silence lies identity. This video is for those who are tired of performing, tired of proving themselves to people who will never understand what they truly are. This is for the builders, the thinkers, the unseen ones. Let's begin. Part 1. Visibility is a trap. We live in a culture that tells us be visible or be forgotten. But visibility is not freedom, it's surveillance. Every time you tell people what you do, what you're working on, what you dream of, you surrender a piece of your sovereignty. Because people don't see your vision, they see your position. And the moment they know your position, they start to calculate their next move around it. Curtis Yarvin warned about this in his writings on hierarchy and hidden systems. He said that real power never declares itself, because to declare is to invite opposition. The unseen hand is the most effective force in any system. It directs, influences, shapes, but never identifies itself. Byung-Chul Han, too, critiques this new compulsion to make everything public. He argues that the digital age has created an achievement society where every individual must constantly prove, perform, and expose their success. But what happens to the soul in such a society? It becomes a brand that never rests. A brand that must constantly announce itself to remain alive. If you tell people what you do, if you constantly explain, post, and perform, you become part of that machine. You're no longer acting out of truth, but out of strategy, out of fear of invisibility. And in that fear, you lose your depth. The true philosopher, the true creator, does not seek applause. He seeks control of himself, of his vision, of his own time. Curtis Yarvin would say, real power operates from behind the curtain. Byung-Chul Han would add, real peace lives behind the curtain too. The curtain, that symbol of privacy, of mystery, is where meaning grows. And every time you tear it down by oversharing, by explaining, by revealing, you kill what could have become something great. So ask yourself, are you building something real or just showing people that you're building? Because the moment you need to show, you've already lost what makes it sacred. Part 2. Silence is strategy. Silence is not weakness. It is architecture. Every word you choose not to speak builds a wall that protects your energy. The powerful understand that silence is a form of intelligence, a strategy that separates thinkers from talkers, builders from dreamers. In the age of exposure, silence has become rebellion. Byung-Chul Han calls this the disappearance of negativity. He means that our society has lost its ability to say no. We no longer resist, we perform. We no longer retreat, we expose. Everything is turned into light, into information, into noise. But silence reintroduces negativity, the power to withhold, to retreat, to keep something to yourself. It's not passivity, it's control. When you stay silent about what you do, you reclaim authorship over your own life story. You refuse to be written by the expectations of others. Curtis Yarvin's model of power works in the same way. The invisible hand moves but never reveals its source. Because once you reveal, you become a target, a predictable node in a system, designed to neutralize what it can see. To stay silent, to work unseen, is to stay unassailable. So many people lose years of their lives explaining their vision to those who can't even see themselves clearly. They share their plans and watch as those plans get diluted by doubt, jealousy, and misunderstanding. They talk too soon, and in talking, they dissolve the magic. There is a sacred stage in creation, the invisible stage. That's where your energy is raw, unshaped, and full of power. Once you expose it too early, it begins to decay under the light of other people's opinions. So guard it. Build in silence. Let your results speak, but even then, don't explain them. People don't need to understand you. They only need to feel that something powerful is moving. Because when mystery surrounds you, curiosity follows. And curiosity is the root of respect. Tell less, do more. Let the silence echo your work. Part 3. The currency of secrecy. Power in its purest form is invisible. The moment you can point at it, it's already slipping away. That's why secrecy is not weakness, it's currency. The fewer people who know your next move, the more freedom you have to make it. Curtis Yarvin once described governance as a cathedral of power, a structure so subtle that most people never notice its walls. That's how real authority works, not through announcements, but through structure. You don't tell people what you're doing. You simply design systems that make them move around you. Every secret you keep about your process, your project, or your plan adds another layer of insulation to your influence. It's not paranoia, it's precision. Because every person you tell is a potential distortion, a filter that can twist your intent, doubt your aim, or quietly wish for your failure. Byung-Chul Han would call this the fatigue of exposure, the constant need to be seen. To explain, to justify it exhausts the soul. He says that the digital self is a transparent cage. We believe we are free, but the walls are made of our own willingness to be visible. Think about that. Every post, every update, every announcement becomes another bar in that cage. You tell the world who you are, and in return, the world tells you what you should be. Secrecy breaks that cycle. It restores autonomy. When no one knows your next move, you are unpredictable, and unpredictability is power. It's what keeps you sovereign in a world addicted to disclosure. So when you feel the urge to announce your plans, pause. Ask yourself, is this for clarity or for validation? Because validation is the cheapest form of approval. It fades the moment the algorithm forgets you. But secrecy, real intentional secrecy, compounds quietly, like interest in a hidden account. One day when your work emerges fully formed, the world will call it sudden success. But you will know it wasn't sudden. It was silent. Part 4. The illusion of connection. We live in what Byung-Chul Han calls the society of positivity, a culture that forbids distance. Everyone must be connected, reachable, transparent, responsive. We mistake constant communication for real connection. But in truth, the more connected we are, the less we see. Curtis Yarvin speaks about control systems, about how visible networks don't create freedom, they create conformity. When you're surrounded by connection, you lose perspective. The group begins to think for you. The network decides what is acceptable, and suddenly you're not building your path. You're optimizing for applause. The more you tell people what you do, the more you depend on their reaction to know if it's right. You become an addict of feedback, a slave to engagement. Byung-Chul Han warns that this constant exchange of approval destroys contemplation. Because contemplation requires absence. It needs silence. It needs the space between messages, between notifications, between glances at the mirror. But we've erased that space. We show everything. We post before we think. We record before we reflect. We respond before we even feel. And that's why we lose depth. Connection without mystery becomes noise. If everyone knows what you're doing, then what makes your work sacred? What makes it yours? Yarvin might say, once the crowd knows your blueprint, they own your structure. Han would respond, once you expose your inner world, it no longer belongs to you. So connection, that golden promise of the digital age, is not the opposite of isolation. It's a new kind of loneliness, because when everyone sees you, no one really sees you. To tell people what you do is to surrender your solitude, and solitude is where originality is born. Protect it. Don't let constant visibility dilute your ideas. Let your distance sharpen your vision. Because true connection doesn't come from exposure, it comes from meaning. And meaning grows in the dark, not in the spotlight. Part 5. The Architecture of Influence. Influence is not about talking. It's about designing the conditions that make others move. The most influential minds in history did not broadcast every thought. They built frameworks that reshaped how others think. Curtis Yarvin's idea of formalism, that power should be recognized in its structure, not its slogans, teaches us something crucial. If you want to control outcomes, you must first control visibility, because what's visible can be attacked. What's hidden can act freely. Byung-Chul Han offers the same warning from a spiritual angle. He says that when everything becomes transparent, we lose eros, the tension, the mystery, the magnetic pull that makes life meaningful. Transparency kills allure. And the same is true of power. The moment people fully understand you, they stop respecting you. That's why you never tell people what you do. Because mystery is not deception, it's design. It's the oxygen that allows authority to breathe. Think about a great artist, a visionary, or a thinker. Their influence doesn't come from how often they speak. It comes from how precisely they choose their moments. Silence between their words becomes a form of punctuation, a reminder that not everything needs to be known to be powerful. When you operate quietly, you become like a gravitational force, unseen but undeniable. People sense your movement without needing to hear your announcement. They feel your trajectory, even if they don't understand its origin. Curtis Yarvin would call that asymmetry, the ability to act without being acted upon. Byung-Chul Han would call it presence without exposure. You don't need to shout to influence. You don't even need to explain. You only need to stay consistent, intentional, and unexposed long enough for your impact to crystallize. In the end, your silence will speak louder than any explanation ever could. And those who once doubted you will call your calm confidence, your privacy wisdom, and your mystery genius. Because power is not what people see. It's what they feel when they realize they never saw it coming. Part 6. The Discipline of Invisibility. Power is not maintained through noise. It's preserved through rhythm, the rhythm of restraint. Those who learn when to disappear are the ones who last. In a society obsessed with constant presence, invisibility is an art form. Byung-Chul Han writes that the digital self lives under the tyranny of visibility, a life where nothing can remain hidden, where every movement must be traced and tagged. To be invisible, then, is not to vanish. It is to choose when to appear. Curtis Yarvin understood this from the mechanics of governance. He said, "Control isn't about being everywhere. It's about being unavoidable. That's the secret of invisibility. It's not absence, it's design. You don't vanish into irrelevance. You vanish into structure. Your presence is felt in the way systems move, not in the way your name trends." Byung-Chul Han warns that we are exhausting ourselves into transparency. We show too much, explain too fast, and rest too little. We think exposure equals existence, but the opposite is true. The more you reveal, the less there is left to reveal. The invisible individual is free from this burden. They do not perform to prove. They perform to perfect. They do not chase visibility. They cultivate inevitability. Their discipline is in withholding. Invisibility gives birth to anticipation. People start to wonder what you're building, what you're thinking, what you're planning, and that curiosity gives you leverage. Because the most powerful question in any human mind is not what did they say, it's what are they hiding. Silence makes them look for you. Mystery makes them wait for you. And patience, and that rarest of virtues, ensures that when you finally act, your move echoes far louder than their noise. The discipline of invisibility, then, is not withdrawal. It's mastery of timing. You vanish only to reappear when the world least expects you, and most needs you. That's the rhythm of real influence. Disappear to build, reappear to transform. Part 7. Power that speaks in shadows. Not all light is good. Some light blinds. Some light burns. That's why the strongest forms of power operate in shadows, not because they're evil, but because they're enduring. Curtis Yarvin's world is one of hidden architects, the engineers of order who never stand on stage. They understand that control requires distance. When you are too close, too visible, you lose perspective. You become another actor in the spectacle you once directed. Byung-Chul Han expands this idea in his critique of performance culture. He says we've replaced being with showing, and meaning with metrics. Everything must be shared. measured, liked, or followed otherwise. It doesn't exist. But the shadow resists measurement. It holds depth that cannot be translated into data, emotion that cannot be coded into a caption. So the wise choose the shadows not out of fear but out of protection. They know that influence that survives must remain unseen, because light consumes everything it touches. Only shadow preserves. When you don't tell people what you do, you are not hiding weakness, you are safeguarding evolution. You are protecting your unfinished state, allowing your ideas to grow without interference. You are guarding the sacred process that turns effort into excellence. Yarvin might say, if you wish to control a structure, you must first remove yourself from its sightlines. Han would echo, if you wish to preserve your soul, you must escape the mirror. We are drowning in mirrors, reflections of reflections, people telling stories not to live, but to be seen living. But the ones who will outlast this noise are those who build in the dark. They understand that every era of chaos eventually needs architects of silence, and when the noise collapses, the quiet ones rise, because they are the only ones who remember how to think. Ending. The silence after the applause. So what does it mean to never tell people what you do? It means you have chosen substance over performance, creation over confession, mastery over marketing. Byung-Chul Han teaches that in a transparent society, the soul becomes glass visible but fragile. You are no longer a mystery. You are content. And content once consumed is forgotten. But when you keep your silence, when you build without announcing, you create something eternal, presence without explanation. The world begins to feel your influence long before it understands your name. They sense the direction of your movement, even if they cannot trace your steps. That is how true power speaks, not in statements but in shifts, not in posts but in patterns, not in applause, but in the silence after the applause, the stillness that lingers. When all noise has passed, yet your work remains. Curtis Yarvin would call that sovereignty, the ability to act without needing permission. Byung-Chul Han would call it peace, the liberation from performance, the recovery of your own rhythm. You were not born to explain yourself. You were born to build yourself. So stop telling. Stop performing. Start constructing your quiet empire, one that moves in silence and expands without attention. Because in the end, people do not remember those who shouted the loudest. They remember those whose silence changed everything. So disappear. Create. Return when the world is ready, and let them see what silence was building all along.